Everyone, just a couple more minutes and we're going to get started. Hey everyone, if you're just joining, give me a second while I prepare the rest of these videos. Or I just have to add one more video actually to what I want to review, and then we'll get the show on the road. And if you guys are just tuning in, you can go to our YouTube channel, Voodoo Weightlifting. Just type it into YouTube and you'll see this exact same screen, except you'll have access to my computer monitor versus this IG live stream, which is no more than my phone being held up to my computer monitor. So it'll be much clearer that way. I would recommend it. Give me a second. Please give me a second. There we go. Alright. Almost ready. Okay, let's go ahead and do this. Alright, so today we are going to do yet another video analysis. I had, how many videos do I have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 videos that we're going to be going over that people submitted to me earlier this week, and we'll knock them out one by one. And after each video, I'll take maybe a minute on each. How's it going, Rhino? I'll take about a minute after each video to answer any questions that you may have or address any points you may make. So, then I'd like to preface each of these video analysis streams by saying that this is just my opinion of how I interpret their technique. So any input I may have, any recommendations that I may have, they're my opinion, they're not set in stone. I'll be the first to say that I, along with many coaches, are still learning the ins and outs of this sport. So don't take this as gospel. Just take it as one interpretation, and there may be coaches that have a completely different interpretation of the same lift. So yeah, just keep that in mind. Alright, so this first video was sent to me by Terrence. His Instagram handle is Lil Big Kahuna. So let's see what Lil Big Kahuna has for us on this snatch right here. I'm just gonna let each video play through one time, and then I'll start breaking it down and share my thoughts. Alright, so biggest thing that jumped out to me, the bar is not making contact. Really, or let's take a step back. So the bar is a bit too far ahead of him, right from when the bar comes off the floor up until he extends. Like the bar is just too far ahead of him throughout this whole lift. So he's a powerful guy. So I'll just nail a few steps, a few recommendations that I would have for him to help kind of break his lift down and make it more efficient, keep the lift closer to him. So I personally like to break the lifts down, what's referred to as like the top down. So I like to start out with the top of the pull and teach an athlete how to properly perform the top of the pull, and then work their way down the leg. And so first what we'll address is that the bar is not contacting his hips, or really it's not contacting his body at any part during this lift. So what I would recommend for Terrence to do is to break the snatch down and to practice learning how to perform snatch pulls from the hip, where you start with a bar at the hip, and then you just simply practice bending the body and then extending, shrugging up on the toes. And so the drill would look something just like from here to here without him actually coming off the ground, but each time that he would perform that movement, he would want to feel the bar brush past his hips and stay close to his body each time. And so once he practiced that for a few sets, I would then have him work his way down the leg, show him how to lower the bar down to the knees, and just, again, feeling the bar maybe lightly trace down the thighs, trace down the body. Then he performs a pull in that same fashion, getting the bar to brush. And so I noticed from the floor to the knees, you can watch this end cap of the bar right here, and notice how as the bar is coming off the floor and it's passing his knees, notice how that bar is drifting away from him. So he's really pulling the bar around his knees right here, instead of pulling his knees around the bar. The bar is drifting away from him rather than coming into him, coming towards his body. So a simple cue I would tell an athlete that is pulling off the ground like this is to think about pushing through the floor with the legs, or pressing the floor away from him. So yeah, are there any questions before we move on? Take a look at the YouTube channel real quick. Alright, no questions, we'll go ahead and move on. So this next lift was sent to me by Irina, and the way I wrote her name down, it looks like it's Rendos, but I can't read my own handwriting at times. But let's just watch through this video one time, and then we'll break it down. So she comes off the floor nicely. Recall what I said about Terrence's lift off the floor. From the floor to the knees, you would like for the legs to press through the floor to get the bar off the ground. And if you do that, if you're primarily using the legs to pull the bar off the ground, the knees will drift out and back, or back and out, however you want to think of it. But in general, the bar will kind of drift in with the body off the floor. And this isn't the best angle to see it, but you can at least tell it's not drifting away from her. Notice that her hips and her shoulders, you can see from the floor to the knees, they're rising up at about the same rate. So right off the bat, she has a very good pull. And so she pulls the bar contacts right at about her hips. She has a nice vertical extension, and it looks like she's keeping the bar close. So already liking this pull a lot. So now let's take a look at the pull under. So something I noticed, and I don't think this is necessarily uncommon, but something I notice is watch the height of her shoulders when she starts shrugging under this bar. It looks like that left shoulder is kind of shrugging under a little bit more than that right shoulder is. And that could just be a dominance issue. Maybe her left side just happens to be stronger, so she uses it more. But that's just something that kind of jumped out at me. And it jumped out at me because I'm the same way. So let's take a look at her pull under right here. So it looks like the bar is crashing on her a little, or jolting her. The timing looks a little bit off when she receives this clean or pulls under. And the giveaway for me is how she settles in the bottom of the clean, pauses a little before going out. There isn't like a bounce out of the bottom of the clean. She isn't. It looks like some energy was lost in the bar, some whip, or just energy in general is lost pulling under, and it was just kind of, the bar is kind of at a dead stop right here rather than being a little bit whippy. You can see that whip a little when she initially receives it, and I think the bar, it looks like it crashes on her ever so slightly. There isn't too much clearance between, maybe more so there's clearance on this shoulder in the bar versus this shoulder in the bar. But just watch her hair. So her hair is moving, and then it stops moving right here on the top of her head. She racks the bar, and then kind of notice how her hair starts moving again. And maybe I'm looking into that too much, but it looks like just the bar just kind of like jolts her body a little. And I think maybe that's why she has to pause at the bottom of this clean. So, a recommendation I would have for an athlete who has the bar crashing, just practice some hang cleans from mid-thigh or from the knees as a warm-up, and focus on pulling yourself to the bar. So there are two parts of the pull, the clean. The phase where you're pulling the bar up, and then once you finish pulling the bar up, you're pulling yourself to the bar. And if the bar is crashing on you like this, that could be a sign that you're dropping under the bar versus pulling under the bar. If you drop under the bar, there's going to be a little bit of clearance between your shoulders and the bar before the bar comes to your shoulders. But if you're extending and then pulling yourself to the bar, there should be very little clearance between your shoulders and the bar when you actually receive it. And if I can explain that better, let me know. And we also have a couple of drills on our IGTV on pulling under the bar on both the snatch and the clean that I would recommend looking at. It's referred to as the extended clean. Anyway, let's take a look at these jerks. I'm a big fan of the dip and drive. Alright, so for her jerk, notice, this is the part that I like the most about her jerk. Notice that going from the dip to the drive, it's one put together motion. So it doesn't even look like the dip and drive are segmented into two different steps going from the dip to the drive. She dips and then immediately drives up. It's not a dip, a pause, a drive, as sometimes you'll end up seeing. So something that jumps out at me though is take notice of her left knee when she starts driving the bar up. And what do you guys see that's happening right here? She's dipping, the knees are staying over her toes, which you would like. But then once she starts driving up, that left knee in particular wants to cave in a little and wants to shift in a little before she drives up. And if the knees start drifting in, sometimes that can cause the body to rock forward a little bit on the drive up. And so one thing that she mentioned to me was that she has trouble with her arm lockout on the jerk. And you really don't see it manifest itself until about the third rep, but I think that right elbow in particular is what she's talking about. And it looks like, okay, this is the third jerk that she just performed. It looks like that left knee caving in is becoming a little bit more exaggerated as she gets more fatigued. But recall that her left shoulder seemed to be shrugging up a little more on the clean. Now on the jerk, her left arm is locking out nicely, and it looks like it's that right elbow, that right arm that wants to unlock a little and give. So maybe there might be something to be said for her to perform some unilateral work just to strengthen this left side in general. I'm not exactly sure how you would go about that. I would personally use a shotgun approach of just maybe doing some dumbbell shrugs with each side individually, doing some unilateral dumbbell presses just to strengthen this tricep along with this shoulder independently of this tricep and this shoulder. Because whenever you're performing movements with a barbell, say even if she just started pressing and only used a barbell, if she's used to using this left side more than her right side, then doing presses with a barbell is just going to augment, it's just going to kind of accentuate that dominance on this side from this side. So you want to work each side independently of one another if one side is being more dominant. So yeah, she does a lot of things right in the lift. So to sum it up for the clean, I would just recommend for her to focus on pulling herself to the bar, and on the jerk, focus on keeping her knees over her toes on the dip and drive, and maybe throw in some presses once or twice a week or so with dumbbells, and working each side independently of one another. Does anyone have any questions before we move on to the next lift? No questions? Then we'll move on. Alright, so this video was sent from Jess Knight, and her comment was that she struggles to snatch anything over 25 kilos. So let's go ahead and play this video through. Alright, so Jess moves pretty well. I think she may just be learning the lift, so there are just two things I want to point out for her if she's watching this stream. First, I would tell her to focus on balancing on the middle of her foot when she's pulling the bar. So, as I've mentioned in the last stream, your weight is going to revolve around your foot throughout the course of the pull. Like right here, the weight should be centered around the middle of her foot, and then as she's pulling the bar from the floor to the knees, weight's shifting more towards her heels. Then once she comes up to the hips and is about to extend, the weight shifts back towards the toes. So all of that happens, but it happens naturally. The best way to think about it is just to focus on staying balanced on the middle of the foot, and all of the weight shifting that I just mentioned will happen naturally. So if she just thinks about starting in the middle of her foot and driving through the middle of her foot from here, even from here, middle of the foot, and here, middle of the foot, she'll be a whole lot better off. I don't know if she's been taught this, but she may have been taught to sit back on her heels. And one reason I think that is because when the bar is passing the knees right here, when the weight should be shifting towards the heels, it's shifting really far back in the heel, so much that her toes are coming off the ground ever so slightly. It's very subtle, but notice from here to here. You see that right there. Her toes are coming off the ground ever so slightly, so that's an indicator that she's off balance. So number one, Jess, I would say to focus on driving through the middle of your foot or staying more balanced. Now, she extends nicely. She extends straight. But notice how the bar is almost to her chest right here, and her body is still extended. And then she starts pulling under. So the way I would describe it, her pulling the bar up and pulling under the bar is kind of segmented right now. You would like for pulling the bar up and pulling the body under to kind of flow together, to be one smooth motion. You pull the bar up and then you immediately pull under. But it looks like she hangs out here for a little and then pulls under. So the other recommendation I would have for Jess is to try to make the pull up and the pull under one smooth motion versus pulling the bar up. And maybe she's just thinking about trying to pull the bar up to here, like high pulling it before pulling under the bar. But no, you extend up to here, and then once the bar has contacted the hips and you've extended, you've elongated the body, then the next movement you make is pulling down underneath the bar, wedging yourself between the bar overhead and the ground underneath. So, Jess, in short, two things I would tell you to think about. One, stay balanced on the middle of your foot in the pull. Two, make the pull up and the pull under flow together. Just one smooth motion. Alright, are there any questions? Harley, what about her foot position when she lands in the jerk? Oh, sorry, I didn't see that comment until just now. Are there any questions about this snatch right here? If there is not, then we are going to move on to the next lift. Alright, and this video is from Reagan. She does our programming, the Voodoo Solution, and in the last video that she sent to us, I'll just name out a couple of things that she needed to correct on her lifts. So she was sitting so far back on her heels, just like in the last lift, that her toes were coming off the ground during the pull. So balance was an issue for her in the clean. And likewise in the jerk, when she was dipping for the jerk, she was sitting so far back on her heels that her toes were coming off the ground. And on her jerk, when she hit her split, her legs were landing really stiff. So the two things that she had needed to focus on were one, just being more balanced, and two, actually landing in a good split, rather than landing with the legs completely stiff and straight, just landing really, rather than just stiffly sticking her legs out. So let's take a look at this. So I'll say it, leaps and bounds of improvement from last week to this. So she does rock back towards the heels, maybe a little bit too much. You can see her toes wanting to come off the ground. But last week, the whole bottom of her shoe and her toe box actually came off the ground. So that's already an improvement right there. And the bar was whipping away from her pretty drastically last week, and I think just by virtue of her being more balanced, now the bar is staying closer to her body when she extends. So I'm very happy with that clean. She's definitely made improvements on that. So let's take a look at her balance on the jerk now. And hey, that's a huge improvement right there. So let's go, let's watch the dip. Those feet are staying in complete contact with the ground on the dip. So she's balanced on the drive. So again, very happy with her balance overall. And her legs are landing much better on the jerk. Like last week, if you were to have watched her jerk, this back knee would have been completely locked out. Her back leg was completely straight and locked out. Now there's a little bit of give in that back knee. So making progress there as well. If there's anything to critique on her lifts, it would be, well, I'll mention this on the jerk. Try to maybe reach that front foot. Or no, don't think about reaching the front. Just try to have the feet land together. Notice that the front foot strikes the ground and is planted before that back foot really has time to get planted on the ground. And there is a debate on whether the back foot should land first or the feet should land together. Personally, I'm a proponent of teaching for the feet to land together. But yeah, so it can go two ways. Like, it's generally agreed either the back foot lands first and then the front lands, or the feet land together. But you never want the front foot to land before the back foot does. So I would just tell her to think about balancing more on the clean and to focus on the feet landing together on the jerk. Are there any questions before we go forward? What do you think about the Toma shuffle? I would classify the way that, and I can't even pronounce her name. I know Mr. Hook Grip, he calls her the Tominator, but what does she do? She keeps driving off of her front leg, and her back leg moves out while she's still driving through the leg that's going to go forward, if I recall correctly. And I would just classify that as an idiosyncrasy. Like, that's insane, and I don't even know if she feels like she's doing it. But yeah, I'm not gonna. When you're that high of a level and she is an elite level lifter, that movement pattern is so ingrained, it's probably not worth trying to take a step back and learning like a conventional technique. So I would never teach someone to do that, but if they were lifting the weights that she was lifting, then I would be hard pressed to talk myself into trying to correct that. Like, at some point, when a lifter becomes a high enough level and they have so many years under their belt, and you have to realize like they kind of have a lifespan of being a high level competitive lifter, if you try to change something as drastic as that, chances are it's just gonna hinder the rest of the years they have left in competition. So those are my thoughts on that. Are there any more questions before we move on? All right. And so Reagan, and I apologize if I'm pronouncing that name wrong. I've had friends with the name Reagan. So, but she also sent me a video of a clean pull that she was performing. And so she's pretty balanced. And some people might teach an athlete to perform clean pulls this way, but I would personally, I would prefer to have her perform them differently. So let's take a look at this right here, and I'm gonna shift my screen over real quick. So, all right. And the only reason I'm doing this is to be able to draw a line. So, all right. So let's take a look at the way her body is oriented, when she's extending. And how would you guys describe this? Is she vertical? Is she lean back? What do you guys on Instagram think? You tell me. Vertical or lean back? Well, okay. If I won't get an answer, I'll just tell you guys anyway. So here is a straight line right here. And compare it, this line, to where her shoulders are. Yeah, Harley, I agree. I agree. Okay, so we're kind of 50-50 across the board. Maybe. So I personally would say that she's leaning back a bit. And so maybe when she's actually performing the clean, when she goes from extending up and starts pulling under the bar, then maybe the shoulders would retract a little bit. But I think there's a hint of a lean back here. And so what I would prefer to see for her is for her body to more form a vertical line behind the bar versus like this. I would consider her body a little bit bowed back, or her a little bit arched back at the top of the pull. And because I find that when athletes try to deliberately pull their shoulders back like this at the top of the pull, it kind of sends the bar a little bit away from their body. If the shoulders retract back too far, then the hips are going to come forward as a result. So that's just something something I'm thinking, kind of think. And yeah, her head is still looking forward, but her shoulders are retracted back. And I guess if you watch the frame a little bit more as it progresses, her shoulders go even more back. But yeah, that's kind of what I see right there. So I would prefer for her to try to extend her body more vertically, rather than retracting her shoulders back that much. My personal opinion. Again, there may be coaches that teach for an athlete to kind of pull back a little, and I'm not going to try to get in debate and say that one is right or wrong. Just my opinion. Are there any questions before we move forward? If there are not any more questions, all right, let's go to the next video. All right. And this video was sent to me by Amy Gordon. So let's take a look at it. All right. So let's break down this clean first. So if there was anything that you took away, Amy, from watching this, it would be maybe to try to procure how you're coming off the floor, or focus on how you're coming off the floor. So you have a dynamic start, and your hips are lowering down, and it looks like there is never a distinct point in which your body is set before you start pulling the bar. It looks like you're lowering your hips down to get set, and then you start pulling before you finish getting set. And to kind of compare that with something, maybe what you could do instead is to lower your hips, make sure you're set and locked in, and then start pulling. You could still have a dynamic start that way, but the only reason I mentioned that, about 25 years ago, I sat down with Niku Vlad, heaviest guy to have snatched double bodyweight. I sat down with him at the World Championships and had him watch a few of my videos, and that's the exact same thing that he pointed out at me. And the biggest thing he pointed out is, well, if there's never a distinct point where you hit a start position before you start pulling, then you're going to be inconsistent across the board. Some reps, your hips may be higher than others in your start position, because there's not really a distinct set position. So maybe try to find, I don't know, just for like an instantaneous moment, find a point in which you're getting set before you start pulling. Now, it doesn't have to be like a static start where you lower your hips, pause for a few seconds, and then start pulling, but Just the thought. And do whatever feels best for you too. You may test it out, the suggestion, and it feels god awful and you feel like you can't get any weight off the floor, then just disregard what I just said. Alright. So, but the biggest thing that's really jumping out at me, aside from that, notice what's happening with the plates as you're lowering your hips to get set. And the dead giveaway is the letters. So what do you guys see is happening as she's lowering her hips down to get set? What's happening with the bar? What's happening with the plates? Alright, I'll tell you guys. So the bar is rolling away from her as she's getting into her start position. And so why is that a concern? So yes, Jen, it's moving. You don't want it to... The first direction you want the bar to move once it starts moving is up and towards your body. Now, right before this bar even comes off the ground, it's rolling away from her. So what does this mean? Now, throughout the whole lift, throughout the whole pull, the bar has a little bit of forward momentum, horizontal momentum away from her throughout the course of the pull. So anytime you lift an object that's even slightly further ahead of you, it's going to be heavier than if you're keeping it closer to your body. So it's just making the whole pull a lot harder for her. And so she gets the bar to her hips. That's a good power position right here. And as she extends, it looks like the bar maybe kicks away from her a little bit. And I would tell her to maybe think about getting more of a brush rather than the bar banging away. But in my personal opinion, I think the bar is just moving too much, like in terms of horizontal movement, like it's moving away from her off the floor. And then so once she gets ready to extend, now it's going to move drastically in towards her body before then moving a little bit more significantly away. So I think if she got the bar to come straight up off the floor rather than roll away from her off the floor, I bet the bar would stay closer to her body when she pulls under. And so as mentioned in a couple of clean videos ago, the bar, you would like for there to be little clearance between the shoulder and the bar when the bar is traveling to the shoulders, when the athlete is pulling under the bar. But again, when something like the bar rolling away happens from you right off the ground, it's going to influence everything that happens afterwards in that lift. So yes, the bar is crashing a little. Yes, the bar is kind of banging away from her a little. But I would bet if she tried to get the bar to come straight up off the floor rather than rolling away, I would almost be willing to bet money it fixes at least one of these other issues that's happening throughout the course of the lift. Alright, so now let's take a look at that jerk. So, where are we? Alright, so she dips down, her knees stay over her toes, and the bar looks like it's moving straight down. That's good. She drives up, the bar is staying, or the knees are staying over the toes, and then she goes into her split. Alright, so what do you guys think about this split position compared to where her feet were on the dip and drive? I'll give you guys maybe 15 or 20 seconds to share. So this is her dip, this is her drive, and then this is her split. Alright. So, yeah, Harley, I agree. So, her feet, look at the width of her feet. Look at how much distance there is between this right foot and this left foot in her dip and her drive. Now, when she goes into her split, this right foot moves in. Look where it lands versus where it starts. And that back foot, it's harder to tell from this angle, but it looks like it kind of does the same thing. It looks like it drifts in a little bit from where it starts. And so that can pose a problem for the jerk. So the whole purpose of us splitting, landing in a split when we jerk is, one, if you land in a split, you can wedge your body underneath the bar. By the legs landing and slightly bent and lunged outwards, you can get under the bar lower than if you just kind of kept your feet in place. But also, by splitting the feet out, you're more stable. So you have what's referred to like, you have more anterior-posterior stability, or more stability from the front to the back, and you have more lateral stability, or you should have more lateral stability or stability from side to side. And here's a picture to kind of get what I'm talking about with this. So say if you pretended that there was a line between your 2 feet when you were prepared for the jerk, and then you go into a split. You would want to maintain a certain width between each foot even when you go in the split. Now, the way that she performed that jerk, her front foot more landed like right here, and her back foot landed more right here, versus the front foot going straight forward and the back foot going straight backwards. So coaches might refer to that as she tight-roped, as in like her feet landed, each of her feet went inwards versus maintaining a specific width. So my recommendation for her would be to practice performing jerks, and to maybe draw a vertical line between her 2 feet, and just have her straddle the line. And so whenever she performs her jerks, she can just think about staying off of the line that she has drawn in between her feet when she goes into the split. That would be the biggest thing that I would tell her to think about. So, in short, for the clean, I would tell her to try to think about having the bar come straight up off the floor. Maybe starting with the bar. If the bar is starting too close to you, then it will roll away when you lower your hips. So maybe start with the bar a tiny bit further away from you, so that when you start pulling off the floor, the bar comes straight up rather than rolling away. And for the jerk, draw a line in between your feet and think about staying off the line when you go into the split. That would be my recommendation. And so the last video of the day that we have is from Miss Harley Brows. She sent in a submission last week, but for whatever reason, Instagram would not allow me to send a direct message to her. I kept getting some error message, but she messaged me and I got the video, so here we are. And so if I recall correctly, I feel like Harley had mentioned to me that she has a tendency to jump forward in her snatches, and if I misquoted you and that was someone else that told me that, I apologize. But so I like the way that she extends and how the bar stays close to her body. I think, and it looks like, or maybe she said she was catching it on her toes. Either way, the bar looks like it's in front of her when she's receiving it, and yeah, as she's standing, she's like kind of standing through her toes. Like, look at the direction of this bar when she receives it, and then when she catches it, look, it's going forward, 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 forward. She has to lean forward to be able to stand up with it, which it's light enough / she's strong enough to still be able to make the lift in doing that. And I would blame what happens from the floor to the knees on why that happened. So look at her back angle, look at where her hips are, and look at where her shoulders are in her start position. So for me, I personally teach for athletes to maintain this back angle. And so what that means is, so the hips and the shoulders need to stay in the same relative position to one another, and they need to rise up at the same rate when pulling the bar from the floor to the knees. So the easiest way to think about that back angle needs to stay the same once the bar is pulled from the floor to the knees. And so let's see what happens. So even before the bar starts coming off the floor, her hips start rising up, and then as she's pulling, her hips are rising up a little bit quicker, and so you could see her back, it's more horizontal uh, when the bar is at her knees compared to when she was in that start position right here. Or even if we took the moment that the plates separate off the ground right here and compare it to even right there, her hips are rising up considerably quicker than her shoulders. So there are a couple of ways you can go about addressing this. My personal thought, I think she may be starting with her hips a little bit too low. It almost looks like she's starting in a full squat in her start position. So maybe my coach would always say if athletes start with their hips too low, then what their body has a tendency to do is shift towards the position that their hips are more comfortable to be in. So if her back angle wants to be in more of this position, if her hips want to be a little bit higher, then maybe start off with them that way in her start position versus starting with the hips really low and then pulling off the ground. Because when this happens right here, that kind of pitches your weight a little bit forward, but also in doing that, you kind of have to hinge more so when you're going from here to here. But in general, it just kind of distorts the momentum on the bar, and I want to say it does with the hips rising up like this. It does kind of tend to pitch you a little bit forward. So without getting too complicated or thinking too much into this, Harley, maybe just try to start with your hips instead of being right here when you pull the bar off the floor. Maybe just start with them right there instead, and then start pulling and see how that feels. Or if that doesn't feel good and you really want to stick to starting with your hips low, then you're going to have to really fight hard and think about keeping the chest up when you're pulling the bar from the floor to the knees. Like I mentioned in the past few videos, what happens at the beginning of the lift is going to influence everything that happens on the rest of the lift. So you really need to get this part right to have a good shot of making the lift, particularly once you get with heavier weights. The heavier you get, the more these nuances are going to make the difference between a make and a miss. Yeah, so that was my last video. Harley, do you have any questions about what I just said, or does anyone watching the IG stream have any questions? And I'll just wait for a minute or two before I get off, because I know it takes time to type on a phone. It kept freezing. Oh no, that's probably my internet connection. Well, so the Instagram feed or stream, it can be pretty unreliable. So in the future, if you guys want to see the stream nice and clear, just go to our YouTube channel, and we have our actual screen cast on the stream. So I personally think that it's from the floor to the knees that's making or breaking your snatch. So just try to either raise your hips a little bit in your start position. Start where your hips are shooting up towards, if that makes sense, instead of starting with your hips low and then have them shoot up as soon as you start pulling. Maybe just go ahead and start with them a little bit higher, and that'll keep them from shooting up. That, or if you are very set in stone that you want to keep your hips low in your start position, then you're just going to have to fight hard to keep your chest up. Well, all right. If no one has any questions, then I guess we will go ahead and end the stream. If any of you need programming, we did just start putting out a generalized template called the Voodoo solution. Pretty simple and straightforward stuff. We try to include a handful of warm-up sets before the lift, just to drill a good extension on the pull, hitting good position, so on and so forth. If you ever have any questions about that, please let me know. If you ever have any training questions, please let me know as well. But yeah, another fun stream. Hope that came out all right, and maybe in the next couple of weeks we'll put another one out. Yeah, so thanks for watching.